It's been that kind of week, team. I'd just like to welcome everybody into this space. Some of you would have heard me ranting and raving a bit earlier down the road. Some of you have come here fresh, so to those people who are just arriving for this session, welcome. Tonight, I'm going to be hosting a panel discussion with three fantastic speakers from all around Taranaki. I'd like to actually welcome them one by one and just have them come in behind me. We're getting a little celebrity kind of catwalk situation. It's almost like a wrestling announcer. I've got notes and everything. So, our first Rangatira this evening is Catherine Love, or Ātiawa, Taranaki, Ngāti Ruanui, Ngā Ruahinerangi, who has continued a proud family tradition of fighting ōpatu, confiscation, has held a range of leadership roles for her iwi, including as a treaty negotiator and a trustee of various Māori lands and social trusts. She has also held national and international positions in health, psychology, social service, justice, and educational leadership. Mai mahara. What a crowd. All right, next up, we have Kassie Hartendorp from Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Tūwharetoa. She is Director of Progressive Campaigning Organisation Action Station, has also been involved in movements for citizen justice, workers' rights, economic justice, LGBTQIA rights, and anti-racism, and is a former youth worker, although I suspect it never really leaves you. Welcome, Kassie. And finally, we have Dougal McNeill, one of the editors of The Socialist, publication of the International Socialist Organisation, ISO, is heavily active and a key man in the ISO's Wellington branch, and is a respected member of the Tertiary Education Union, whom I praised so floridly earlier today. Welcome, Dougal. Before we begin, I'd just like to offer a quick mihi to all those who couldn't be with us from around the Motu tonight, all of those who have recently passed. I'd also like to tuku a mihi to the whenua of this area. In particular, this particular little patch of ground was on the site of, or close to the site of Te Tiriti, which was a settlement of Ngāti Ruanui people. If you're from Christchurch, our two iwi mana whenua in this rohe, Ngāti Toarangatira, and also Taranaki Ruanui, peoples who migrated down sort of in the early 19th century. Previous iwi here were Ngaitara and Moepu. So there's a rich Māori history, some of which we'll be delving into tonight. But before we kick off, I'd also just like to begin with a classic karakia. Please join in if you would like to. Alright, let's do it. Okay. Thank you very much for being on this panel. I think what we'll start with is a brief round of mihi and introductions. So if you'd like to just take a couple minutes to introduce yourself, say anything that I missed out of the introduction, and yeah, give a pipihara or other kind of welcome as feels appropriate to you. I guess we'll start with you.
Tēnā tātou, no pōtarani o kutupuna, pai oia no i te whaki au i te korowai o Kāi Tahu, ki o te pōtu, mehi nui kia koutou. Mehi nui ki te Wellington Socialist Society, me te Canterbury Socialist Society hoki. Ka mihi kia koutou ki tō koutou Nākitanga i tēnei hu. But really looking forward to the conversation and the discussion and learning from the speakers and everyone in the room.
Tēnā koe te tūngane Nīkau, i te karaki i tēnei pō, tēnā koe pai Kath, i te kaitiakitanga, i te manaakitanga, Neera, kei te mihi ki a koe, kei te mihi ki a koe Dougal. Long time no see, kia ora tātou. Ko ai au, I ahu mai au I whia, I te tau tōku pāpā no Ingarani no Kotarani no Itaria hau, England, Ireland, Scotland, Italy, and on my mother's side, I come from Ngāti Raukawa and Ngāti Tūwharetoa. I live in the beautiful lands of Ōtaki at this time, so bit of a trip to come back to the... I'm not blaming all of you, but the rain is just... Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, flashbacks to being here, but it's great to be here. And I think just to say that what I'm really passionate about is organising, community organising especially, movement building, and growing leadership within our movements as well. So really looking forward to joining you all and having a good kōrero here today. Kia ora tātou.
It's just another mic.
Tēnā koutou katoa. We know my iwi, ko Ngāti Tiriti, ko Tāwharetoa, ko Ngāti Ruanui, me haumia i te reo ngā hapu. I te taha o tōku mama ko Ngāti Ruanui, te iwi. My mum was pure English Rose. And ki te taha o tōku pāpā is Socialist pure. When I was growing up, my father used to read, had Marx and Engels, and he also studied tactics of Che Guevara, but he settled basically into a communist way of being that was comfortable to him and his father and his grandfather. And so I haven't formally looked at socialism per se, because I've been stuck in the Māori realm a lot of the time. But just thinking about it, I can see so many alignments, so much in alignment. And I'm keen to talk about it and learn some more tonight. Kia ora.
Thank you for that. So I think the best usage of our time to start off with will be to talk about the struggle for Tino Rangatiratanga. Now the theme for this conference is the dual crisis of Aotearoa, and this dual crisis has reared its head at a number of different moments. Something that we find in this country is that whenever workers' rights are under attack, Māori rights are also under attack. These twin taniwha rear their heads at the same time. And so the first question for the panel this evening, there's such a wealth of experience in all of the reanga on display here today. So, given the struggle for the Māori side of the house, the Tino Rangatiratanga struggle has very deep roots. How have you seen the movement change in your own work and over your own lifetime? Shall we go left to right, or does someone want to hop in?
Okay. How has Tino Rangatiratanga changed in my lifetime? I don't think it has. I don't think it has at all changed as a concept and the way that I understand it. The expression of it has changed somewhat because we are more free to express it openly now in some forums, whereas that was not the case previously. My dad used to talk about during the land hui and things in Taranaki, which were around Te Tiriti, confiscation of our lands. He used to talk about that the sadness of the old people and that when a Pākehā came in the room, even a friend, they would all change. Everybody would change and stop speaking about the pains and the grievance, and you start joking and being the clowns sometimes. But Tino Rangatiratanga is, you're right, it's very deep-rooted And even in the 60s, I used to have to go travel with my grandfather to keep him awake in the car. That was my job. And I remember he used to always drive up to Parliament. He'd park right outside, right up the top, outside by the steps, and take out his little sign written in red biro that said, "Ralph Love, tangata whenua." And, so he would do that sort of thing because he was asserting his rangatiratanga, and it actually wasn't challenged that I know of. But today I think it would be a different story. So, kia ora.
Kia ora whae. I want to talk a little bit about my own personal story. So I was born, as mentioned, to a British, Scottish, Irish, Italian man and a Ngāti Raukawa, Ngāti Tūwharetoa woman. And I was born actually at Wellington Hospital, and not far from here. My Māori mother had a long time experience with mental health problems and had spent most of her life in and out of mental health wards from the age of 19. And about 6 weeks of that, after I was born, I was taken off her from the police and removed from a house on a hill, not very far from here, about a 10-minute drive, and placed into a non-Māori family, a Pākehā family of British and Dutch descent. And that's how I grew up and that's how I lived. And it was interesting because in that whānau, I was one of the last people adopted in the way that I was. It was when the laws were starting to change around closed adoptions. So my adoption was very open, but it was never talked about that I was Māori. The condition of my adoption essentially was that I would no longer be Māori, that was given up, and I was, now New Zealand European. And there were almost no ways back to my whānau Māori. I didn't have any connections with them. I was told that they didn't want me, and there was just no pathways. There was nothing. And so in my mid-20s, I went on the very scary journey to be able to reconnect with my whānau Māori, and that's a whole other corridor, but what I will tell you is it ends well because I refound my birth mother, who still actually just lives about 10 minutes away, not far from the house where I was taken, and found my birth father, and found my extended whānau, my hapu and my iwi, and I was absolutely embraced by them, absolutely embraced. And I didn't realise until I sat in the wharenui and learned about the history of my people, who I didn't know had been my people. It wasn't until I sat there and listened to all the stories that I realised it wasn't an accident that I had been embraced and brought back. And what I mean by that is that in 1975, so, and we're starting to talk about those generations back, we had one person under the age of 30 within our iwi who spoke Te Reo Māori. And the linguist told our people, if you have no one under the age of 30, then your language will die out. That's just what happens. And so they got together and they formed an inter-hapu, an inter-iwi cultural revitalisation strategy. And this was in 1975, and it was a 25-year strategy, and they got laughed at constantly because at that time it was fashionable we had 5-year strategies, but nobody was thinking 25 years in advance. But our old people were firm, and they decided, no, we are going to continue into the future. And one of the principles of that cultural revitalisation strategy is that the marae is our principal home. And what that means is that whenever they found someone who, like me, was lost, completely lost, of course they would welcome us back. It was our principal home. And so when I think about what has changed or what I've noticed, it's that our movement, our world, Te Ao Māori, is constantly growing and expanding because of the people of Kat's generation and Kat's dad and Kat's granddad and all the people who came before that, who created the bones and the vision so that one day they wouldn't know my face 50 years down the line, they wouldn't have known what I looked like or anyone would look like who would show up on the doors, but they just knew and they trusted and they believed that if they put in the work now, then at some point it's going to blossom into some fruits. And so what I've noticed is that Te Ao Māori has been in this place of welcoming people back and being so inclusive, and we're up to almost 20% of the population. You know, we're up to nearly 1 million, I think it is, and I think that's a testament to the people who came before us, making sure that they were holding firm and just creating the pathways back so that we could find ourselves back to each other. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora, Kassie. Thanks for your generosity sharing that story. I want to take this question from the Pākehā side of the fence, because I don't really think it's for me to observe where the movement has gone, but to think maybe from a Pākehā socialist perspective. And preparing for this session, I've had this image in my head of countercurrents, you know, that sort of movement by a bar in a river, or when there's a tide changing of two forces really working against each other, and a real churn happening there, where on the one hand, across the last sort of 20 to 30 years of my active memory, we've seen such extraordinary transformations that I think have been valuable to all of us in the movement. The endurance of Reo Māori that both speakers have already talked about has transformed our unions, has transformed our ways of being able to speak about belonging, has made our politics of welcoming tauiwi, new arrivals, new workers, has really facilitated a whole lot of that work of hospitality that I think has made our movement stronger. I think it was really striking, like a lot of you, I was at the Stockwork on Thursday, and see Ben in front, Ben gave a great speech as well, but the loudest cheer of the day was reserved for the speakers and the resolution on attacks on Māori rights, and that was from a predominantly non-Māori audience, and I think that says something about changes that have gone on in our own movement. My union, the Tertiary Education Union, Te Rangatiratanga, has a co-leadership model now, has a model where there's a Māori and a Pākehā leadership, and that's been enshrined. Similar things are happening in the nurses' organisation and elsewhere. So all of that seems to me enriching and fulfilling and growing our movement. By that I mean the movement for socialism, which is what I'm confident to speak on, alongside a wider social transformation. Just yesterday, I don't know how many of you saw it, but on Shortland Street last night there was a scene where Gia and Esther were having a big argument in Te Reo Māori, and it had nothing to do with things Māori. It was just about life, and it was, I won't try and summarise the plot, it's very complicated, but it's man trouble, that's what was going on. But the point being, I couldn't have imagined that on a television screen in my childhood, and that's a little recognition of struggle, that's a little recognition of social transformation there. The countercurrent though, and the other sort of force that's making these swirling currents at the bar, of course, is I think maybe some of us got a little bit lazy in thinking that there was a settled strategy for the ruling class around treaty partnerships, around settlements, around the cultivation of certain sorts of political politeness. The whole project of the key years, I think there were a number of elements of that institutional politics that I'd stopped paying attention to. And we've seen over the last year, just like with Trump, just like with Brexit, that actually the movement to rip all up and the movement to let loose and attack everything that so many people have worked so many decades for, and to begin a project of just catastrophic disrespect across the board at speed as part of the agenda of the traditional party of capital, the natural party of government in this country for the capitalist class, the National Party, as well as acting New Zealand first. That's the countercurrents, and that's, as often when you're trying to cross a bar, those two together I think make for a very exciting time, but also an enormously frightening and dangerous one.
Kia ora, thank you for that. All of those rich thoughts that you've shared with us. Just on that first question, I want to dig a little bit deeper on these countercurrents that you've mentioned, Dougal. The National Coalition government has launched what we've seen as a new wave or a new intensity of attacks on workers and on Māori and on the treaty. Given that their strategy has become so charged and aggressive, how can we best respond to this coalition government's activities? What are the kinds of strategies we can use to fight back? Maybe just start with...
I think there's a very simple strategy, and it's not hard really, provided egos are put to the side, and that is kōtahitanga. We need to work together. We need to absolutely support each other's movements. We need to stand together, Māori and Pākehā, and actually I think Labour should go back to its socialist roots, because it does have socialist roots, but it has left them behind. The Greens, the Māori Party, and all of us just need to stand together and make it clear. This government, the coalition government, got into power because too many of our people didn't vote. And I take the responsibility. It was a lot of Māori didn't vote. And we need to get them out, get them educated and out to vote for next time, so that this government is a one-term government. Because what our gains on, as far as Te Tiriti is concerned, have been incremental over the years. You know, we've gradually worked up, and it has made a difference, a huge difference. But we're in danger of having that all wiped out. And also the housing and, you know, economic policy and the mining policies and, you know, go on and on and on. Anyway, that's me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lovely sort of anticipation of a conversation we might be having a little bit later about connections between socialism and Te Ao Māori, because that term kōtahitanga, one way we could translate that into some of the English language of socialism is the old saying, in unity is strength, you know, and seeing the aesthetic of William Morris that's being borrowed by the Socialist Society, that's a very old and a very good slogan, yeah, one that we can really draw on here and learn from each other. One of my sort of heroes, one of my theoretical heroes, is the American-Russian socialist, Raya Dunayevskaya. And Dunayevskaya has this line that I love where she talks about the movement from practice, which is itself a form of theory. In other words, we don't go out looking for ideas that we then implant in movements. We go to movements and see how the active participation of workers in the struggle teaches us, and how we try and generalise from those struggles and build from those struggles. And so that for me is also to build on, I agree absolutely with what Catherine has said, and to think with that, what's been the pattern across this year? It's been seeds of unity. Yeah? So the Stockwork meeting on Thursday, the fact that attacks on Māori was central to what was being discussed there at a CTU event, I think is significant. The size of the hikoi on Waitangi Day here in Taranaki and elsewhere is significant. Te Pāti Māori's mobilisation on the day of the budget, the way in which demands from and traditions from Te Ao Māori have been woven into our Palestine solidarity here and elsewhere. So we think, and Catherine's played a role in that absolutely, at the last major hikoi that we had. All of these are real events that are occurring in the movements, and all of these are real mobilisations of people that allow us to have discussions about strategy on the basis of a pre-existing commitment to activity. And I think that's really, really important, because in other periods you can discuss ideas, but there's a sterility to it if it's not linked organically to those kinds of movements. So that's something that we're seeing at the moment that I think is very important. The other aspect, just to, cause a little controversy, I don't know. The other aspect from this that I've changed my mind about quite a lot over the last 20 years is I completely agree with Catherine as well about our need to make this a one-term government. I said it was very frightening, the degree of the tax. Also, we shouldn't underestimate the degree of incoherence and competition and division within the coalition, but equally I don't think we should be embarrassed about or sort of worried about seeming conservative when we say there was a clear difference between struggling for more under the last government and feeling like we weren't getting enough and that things weren't going fast enough, and now being in a defensive position with things being ripped away from us. And the idea that there's sort of no difference or that the electoral space should be a matter of indifference to us, I think has really been sort of shown by the last year not to be a useful way to be thinking about the reality that we're actually in. And don't want to spread this beyond other areas, but I think it's significant tonight when we're talking about these questions and socialism to think about that at a local level as well, and to think about the attacks on local governments and the highly racialised ways in which those are playing out, both in terms of National's agenda with Māori representation, but also in this city in the racialised way in which media and others have carried out attacks on elected representatives. Whatever we think of their individual decisions and disagreements we might have, there is a racist character assassination going on being led by the Post at the moment, and that's a disgrace. And I wanted to find a place to put it in, so I grabbed my moment.
Can I jump in? Yeah, so total everything that's been said so far, and there's two things I want to pick up on. One is 100% the kotaitanga. I think it's rare that you have a moment where even someone within Te Ao Māori, such as Ngāti Tūwharetoa, could make a call for Te Ao Māori to be in kotaitanga and for it to resonate so strong. And I think what I want people in this room to know who are not Māori is that, within Te Ao Māori, I think that the majority of us are doing our best at the moment to even be in kotaitanga with each other. And that's not easy, because when rangatiratanga is your guiding principle, sometimes that overrides kotaitanga, how you work with other people and compared to your authority and what you believe is the right thing to do according to your people. And so that is a challenge, and I think I want you to know that we're working on that with as much strength and integrity as we can, and I think I'm calling on people who are non-Māori to show up in that spirit of kotaitanga as well. Because the reality is that this government, as you all know, are rolling out a far-right populist regime that is working for the most part. I mean, let's just talk about the fact that we've got people like Richard Prebble being on our Waitangi tribunal. They are literally using every inch of power and stacking every decision-making body with their own people. That's what's going on. The fact we have an observer at Wellington City Council, the fact that the decisions around Māori wards are being overridden, the fact that these individuals like Bill English doing the review of Kāi Tahu, who did the most massive sell-off of state houses, in charge of reviewing our public housing regime. Like, what the fuck? That's what we're staring in the face of? And it's like, we don't actually have time. We don't actually have time to be like messing with each other's bullshit. We don't actually have time to deal with the egos, okay? And so what kotaitanga is doing, I believe, it's not just a slogan, it's a practice. It's a practice of how we relate to each other, how we relate to ourselves within the movement. And so what I'm saying is that in order to be in kotaitanga, it also means we kind of have to put our bullshit to the side for a hot second, like maybe 2.5 years will be good, just for now. And think about the intention of, yes, we need rigour and robustness about how we discuss politics, 100%. But we also need to have a degree of care for each other and intention with each other, because I come from a socialist left that split itself into nothingness. What are they doing right now? In terms of, I'm not going to name what they're doing right now, but if you know them, then you know, being jerks. But the thing is that it's like we need each other more than ever, and we need to be serious about it. And part of the reason we need to be serious about it is because, as you will all be watching and witnessing, the real fight is over the public mentality and the public belief. Now, I'm not saying this is where it ends, because we know where it ends, we'll talk about it a little bit later, right? But it's very obvious that the coalition government, when you take a look at Luxon's TikTok, you know they're not talking to the majority of people that we might think we're talking to. They are trying to get the working class on their side, and they're not mucking around. Luxon won't take any interviews with political journalists, but he will be happy to have his own TikTok trying to get people on his side. We have to be really, really clear-sighted about the fact that the far right is trying to claim their ideas as being the popular ideas of the public and the working class, and we have to be serious about growing our movements, growing our organisations in order to be able to intervene in that, because we know they do not have our people's interests at heart. They do not have our planet's interests at heart, no matter what gaslighting bullshit they're on. Sorry, I'm on a real heated rant right now. Sorry, not sorry. To that. One of the things that I think we also need to do is to challenge ourselves around strategy. We can't roll out the same strategy. Like, the right is adapting every single day to our current political and social conditions. We have to challenge ourselves to think outside of the box and be like, maybe the thing that I've been doing for the past 10 to 20 years isn't going to be the right thing right now. Maybe I need to open my mind up to something different, because right now it really is a battle, and we're needing to be able to grow the people who believe in what we believe in if we're going to win in the public terrain. Okay, that's all for now. Kia ora.
So, we talked a little bit about all sorts, really, but we talked a little bit about seizing that public narrative. And I think it's really important to reflect on the idea of theory emerging out of practice. I think the theory of Tino Rangatiratanga that has emerged is one that is dominated by the treaty. I think the treaty has turned into, for good reason, a really effective rallying cry for a whole lot of very disparate kind of revolutionary and anti-authoritarian traditions. And I think people have argued, in fact I know people have argued, that our political opponents are very threatened by the treaty, and they have seen it as a barrier to implementing their neoliberal program of deregulation and privatisation and harm. So I want to get some thoughts from the panel on what you think about this. Do you think that what is really behind, say, the Treaty Principles Bill from the ACT Party is that effort to remove the treaty because it's a barrier to their regressive program? Do you think that's true? And if so, yeah, what whakaaro can you share about that?
Oh, it's absolutely true. If we think about the most successful and revitalising movements over the past decade in particular, we're thinking about things like Standing Rock, yes, an oil pipeline. We're talking about Protect Mauna Kea, which was about basically challenging the idea of science, like Western science, to be able to dominate Indigenous whenua. We're looking at the rise of Indigenous people around the world and in relationship to other movements, for example, Black Lives Matter. We know that there's a relationship between blackness and indigeneity and colonisation and the doctrine of discovery and Te. So we know that actually a lot of these movements are getting in the way of deregulation and privatisation, and that that one of the reasons, I really genuinely believe that it would almost be okay for Māori to continue to be Māori if we were assimilating, and if we were just doing the haka, and we were just using our reo, and having our moko, whatever. If we're doing that, maybe that would be palatable to the ruling class. But the issue is that when you look at the majority of the policies that the coalition is rolling out, they're all about authority and decision making. We're thinking about Māori wards, we're thinking about Marine and Coastal Act, we're thinking about Treaty Principles Bill. All of it is about how do decisions get made at our top levels. So it's okay for us to do like a kariki or be a Māori, but as soon as we actually want to have a say over our whenua, over our moana, over our awa, that's when things get messy. And I really do genuinely believe, you know, people like David Seymour, and I try not to waste too much breath on him because I think the others are just as bad, but he's the kind of sharp end of the stick at the moment. You know, if you think about how he is talking about these things, there's this idea that it's about every New Zealander, right? There's this idea that it's about every citizen, all that kind of bullshit. But we know that it's actually, Te Tiriti it's actually not about every citizen. That's a lie. It really is about opening up the channels for big business, corporate interests to be able to move in on our school lunches happening right now, on our hospitals being proposed, on our public infrastructure. And so I think we just need to be very clear-sighted that at one level we could see this as a populist movement that's trying to turn Pākehā against Māori, and that's true. But at the next level, we need to be illuminating what is actually going on at the level of decision-making, privatisation and power.
Yeah, to build on that, I think this is also an opportunity for us in terms of some of the corridor balance, resistance and strategy, because also there are fissures in the coalition. Yeah, and I think this is a really high-risk strategy because part of what some of the answers to the first question illuminated for me is how deep-seated over decades now struggles around Te Tiriti have actually led then to transformations in understanding across the wider working class. And so, again, thinking about that stopwork meeting, there has been a sense in which the opponent has done some of the unifying work for us, you know, and there's been a sense in which the opponent, the question of why do attacks on treaty rights matter to National and Active New Zealand First currently, as Cassie so ably just articulated, I think it's easier for us to kind of grasp at the moment what's at stake because we can see it playing out. Having said that though, and I think this is where in our movements and our campaigns we want to pay quite a bit of attention to this, different issues in the different parties. I think there's a clear sense with ACT that you have a kind of US-style culture war being imported and picked up and where the political sphere is operating under relative autonomy from the economic, that actually if this can win 2 or 3% away from national, if this can pick up a kind of small business person resentment, that kind of ageing male Pākehā culture of resentment, and you know in my day, oh I can't believe people are getting away with X, Y, Z, there's a block, you know, and that's a block that can translate into votes and can translate into a seat. With New Zealand First, with tobacco, with fisheries, with forestry, with a whole range of industries where Māori rights and Māori connection to whenua are a direct block to profitability and a direct block to being able to exploit. We see a much clearer kind of material link, I think, yeah? And then with national, you've got, at the moment, a kind of incoherent swaying between those two positions. The sense that somehow for brand New Zealand, all the things that Cassie sort of listed might fit a kind of John Key-style Minister of Tourism way of marketing the country abroad, because once you take that away, we were saying before the break, once you trash the environments, stop any recognition of Te Ao Māori, recognise that Lord of the Rings was over 20 years old, you haven't got a lot left. And so there are sections of the capitalist class for quite cynical reasons, for quite disrespectful reasons, that are thinking, is this a good idea? Is this actually the way we want to be presenting ourselves in the world? And then other sections that are saying, let it rip, you know, mine, burn, cut down, fish, kill, pour all of the effluents into the rivers. And that's a conflict within their class that I think we have to look for opportunities to exploit and to push up as we look to our movements as well. This is having terrible effects on people in real time now. This is going to cost lives. I'm not wanting to make light of any of that. But equally, it's not being cut from the same cloth. And paying attention to that, I think, is going to be important for us from here.
Well, I don't know if I can add much to that, but I will talk about what the Te Tiriti meant to my tupuna. Te Tiriti was signed here in the harbour in April 1840 by some of my tupuna And what it meant, I am sure, for them was a template for their iwi and the Pākehā to the Crown, representing the Pākehā settlers, to live together in this country, and it was a template that was consistent with their understandings of Tino Rangatiratanga, that there could be a multiplicity of iwi, including te iwi Pākehā, who had their own rangatiratanga, and they could coexist. And admittedly, we had wars and fights, but we also married and procreated. There's a lot more written and emphasis on the wars because it was men, often ex-army men, Army Navy men, writing the histories. But basically, the threat of Te Tiriti is the threat that we can come together and form a society, and we actually are starting to do it here on the ground, and that is very threatening for the power elite. That is a threatening thing for the power elite. So do I think that the attacks on Te Tiriti are about deregulation and privatisation and facilitating them? Yes, I do. But they're also about something much broader. And I'll end on one little anecdote. My Te Wharepodi signed Te Tiriti, and when he passed, he did an ohaki, which is his deathbed instructions. And he did his ohaki to Te Puni, who was also there and took over from him as the paramount chief. And his ohaki, I'm paraphrasing, but what he said was, look after my Māori people and my Pākehā people, and let your voice in these matters thunder to me in Te Reina. He saw the Pākehā as his people, as much as the Māori, and that was ohaki was repeated when Te Puni passed to Witako Ngātata, and it has been handed down in our family, not just as an ohaki, but as a way for us to view relating to each other as a team, as partners. You know, the power mongers want us to stay divided. They want that more than anything. And so the kōtangitanga that I spoke about earlier is the way we can counter that.
Kia ora, we've got one final question before we take a quick break to grab a cup of tea. I think we've covered some really good ground on the importance of Te Tiriti, the importance of koetanga, and the different kinds of solidarity projects that have given us so much strength historically in this country. Given that socialism at its core really is a program of solidarity and unity, why do you think it is viewed with suspicion as a Pākehā import in this country? Why do we feel as if socialism is some foreign thing written by a European bloke with a funny beard instead of, you know, because I think there's real common ground between the socialist vision of common ownership of the means of production, distribution, exchange, what have you, and also the communal life of pre-European Māori. As you know, I guess the question is a synthesis of these two worldviews possible, or are these connections more superficial, tenuous, what have you? What do you think?
I love this question because I think we're just diving into some of these things that I think need to be talked about. First of all, I would say that there are some important differences between the concept of socialism and Te Ao Māori. And just as there are similarities and commonalities, there are differences and they're quite unique, just as every culture is unique. And so, for example, one thing, our whole social structure is based on whakapapa, is based on genealogy. And it's not just who we connect to and who we relate to, but our connection to our Ātiawa, into the whenua and the moana and so on. It's the social fabric of how we understand the world. And I think that that's something unique to Te Ao Māori and many Indigenous cultures, but it's not necessarily a copy and paste from a socialism that comes from the West. And I'm not saying that there isn't socialism within the global South and within Indigenous communities, because there absolutely is. At the same time, what I sometimes notice is that the concept of socialism can become very rigid and almost speak to a universalism that is beyond the kind of details of cultural relativity, and I find that really offensive. I find it really fucking deeply offensive, because to me it's like, if there is a form of socialism, it has to start from the people and the place and the context in which it is being expressed. And I think there is a denigration of culture that can sometimes come along with that, like, these little minute details about a culture, whereas those details are fundamental to who we are as people, and we can't leave them behind. And so any idea that brings these kind of worlds together has to be able to meet us and see us eye to eye, because at the end of the day, Tino Rangatiratanga is also about determining our own future and determining our own lives. And that means that we have to be able to articulate the worldview that is unique and necessary to us. And I think that sometimes socialism cannot hold that or minimises the importance. And another point on that about culture, I think sometimes culture gets minimised within the socialist world, and I think that it's really important, and I think everybody probably understands it here, because in the last 10 years we've seen a lot of change. But I truly believe that our culture, our Māoritanga, is a vehicle for our liberation. Like, I've seen the way that the most dispossessed, the most marginalised people within my whānau, within whānau around me, have started to lift their heads higher when they reconnect with their reo and when they reconnect with their culture. It gives us a strength and a kaha. And so I don't think any of that can be put down. Our culture is a vehicle for our Tino Rangatiratanga, and they can't be separated. That's my first thought. And then sorry, I really thought hard about this one. And the other element, no, it's gone. So I'm just going to hand the mic and I might come back to it.
Okay. I don't know if it's valid to draw a parallel between feminism in the Pākehā world and mana wahine in the Māori world. But I know that, well, I would say that from my perspective, feminism became very academic, wordy, and, how would you say it, beyond the reach of normal people in some ways. And mana wahine just was. It wasn't spoken about, it was enacted. And I saw it enacted in many ways. When Auntie Betty Borton got up and certain people were not saying what she quite rightly, thought they should be, or were talking too long, she would cut them off with her waiata. And I saw many examples of mana wahine where the wahine were not seen publicly, but they actually controlled things. And they decided what was going to happen, and they told the men, and so forth. In fact, most of the time. And I remember at our own marae, Te Tiriti Te Pō, my father, who was chair of marae, always, if my auntie Muri, or Puto as she was known, came out and said, no, this is not happening, that was it. End of story, debate was finished. You know, because she ran the kitchen. So, and as far as socialism goes, I think there can be some of the languaging and maybe, yeah, there are different cultural contexts with I can't remember what it says. Oh, the socialist vision of commonage. Yeah, but really, a lot of the early writings about Māori talked about smashing the beastly communism of the Māori. Because, and that was the big thing amongst Pākehā politicians, was our communism and how evil it was. But, you know, what we were about was looking after everyone. And it wasn't always fair. You know, we had slavery way back when. So did the English, the British, the Americans. We had cannibalism. They made a very finessed job of different types of torture and killing people. And those things have changed over the years. Both cultures have changed. And I think the principle of resource redistribution, so that it is fairer, the principle of collective rangatiratanga or sovereignty, collective governance, and the principle of mutual aid, you know, reciprocity and helping out people when they need it, and then coming back and helping out, giving what they can. Those are the sort of principles that I think are common. But I do think the language of, the language of this is quite late.
I have a lot of thoughts on that question as well. And I might ground them, actually, if this is useful, it's useful for me. The Kāi Tahu poet, Robert Sullivan, taught me a whakatau aki by the very important Kāi Tahu thinker and writer and organiser Kukapa Tirikātne. Te wharaki kia mōhio ai tātou ki a tātou. E kore e taia te whene kotahi ki te rāranga i te wharaki kia mōhio ai tātou ki a tātou. Mā te mahitahi o ngā whenu, mā te mahitahi o ngā kairāranga ka oti tēnei wharaki. I te otenga, me titiro tātou ki ngā mea pai, ka puta mai. A tana wā, me titiro hoki ki ngā rāranga i mākere, nā te mea he kōrero anō ki reira. And Robert translated it for me like this. The tapestry of understanding cannot be woven by one strand alone. Only by working together of strands and the working together of weavers will such a tapestry be completed. When it's complete, let us look at the good that comes from it. And in time, we should also look at those drop stitches because they also have a message. And what I take from that to me in this conversation is relationships are complicated things, and there's no point denying that. And so there are all kinds of traditions inside socialism in New Zealand that have been driven by and enriched by Māori thinkers and activists, and we could think about Ngāti Tūwharetoa and the Communist Party and the work of the Communist Party around Taranaki in 1942 when the Labour government was attempting a land confiscation. We could think about Tamapuata here in the Māori Organisation on Human Rights and the work of the Bus Drivers Union. We could think about all kinds of moments. But I was going through the index, Tamapuata's memoirs, his family brought out after he passed away. It's a wonderful book, and I recommend it very highly to everyone. If you go through the index on communism and socialism, half the entries say it's got so much in common with Māori life, it's basically the same thing, we've got all these entries. And then the other half say, I'm so sick of the communists and the socialists, they've got everything in common, they're totally different, they're trying to program. And the point being, over the course of a long and active life, he had alliances, he had disagreements, he had battles, he had moments where we worked together. That's what happens, that's how we learn. Why might some of these ideas be seen with suspicion? Because we're coming out of a 40-year-long nightmare where the workers' movement has been on the defensive, has been marginalised, where our institutions have been smashed up, where the cultural centrality of unions to working class existence have been broken away, where all kinds of associations of collectivity have no longer been the case. And so our ideas, when we've carried them out and when we've held those flames alight, have been socially marginal, disconnected to movements of struggle, unable to generalise from the experience of workers, often theorising defeat, often thinking about setback. That's beginning to change. Yeah, that's beginning to change. A number of the movements that Kassie listed internationally have seen this connection between land rights, Indigenous struggle, and the re-emergence of working class self-activity. The question of the party is in the mind again, not as an abstract theoretical question, but actually questions around how do we get representation, how do we mobilise. Conferences like this, new organisations are springing up around the country and they are organising together, so we're having debates, but they're meaningful debates because they're about what do we do, how do we think, how do we interact in the world. They're not sterile, we actually realise that we have something to lose, and so we want to build that Kāi Tahu on a sense of shared responsibility. There's also tensions, and since this is going into the break, I think this is a useful tension between the different sides of the fence there, Te Ao Māori and Te Ao Pākehā, in terms of Te Tiriti. And I was looking, another book that I was sort of looking through getting ready today is Cohen Jones, the Ngāti Ruanui theorist, someone I admire immensely. And Jones's work, that I've learned an enormous amount from, concludes also that one of the ways that the settler state can get legitimacy is paradoxically by honouring Te Tiriti, and that reconciliation may actually be a way for the settler state to gain some legitimacy. I don't want that to happen as a socialist. I'm against the state in the same way that I was against Queen, well, I wasn't around, but you know what I mean. Queen Victoria wasn't very keen on her. So Māori, iwi, whānau, hapu, organising in a righteous struggle to demand recognition from a partner in Te Tiriti who ought to carry out what it committed to do is something that should have the support of all socialists. But at the same time, we're against that state and we're for the transformation of that state into something radically democratic and real. That's a tension, okay? And that's a tension that's going to be a tension in our struggles. The longer I'm involved, the more I find the language of the black freedom movements in the United States helpful here. I think one of the ways to think about the socialist project is it's a freedom struggle. Yeah? What would it mean properly to be free? What would it mean to live in communities that exercise genuine human freedom and that sort of genuine human flourishing? All the questions of culture that have been raised there, to me, are absolutely central to that, because what we're talking about is how can we have a world in which we can actually be fully human and enjoy our humanist potential rather than seeing Te Taiao, the environment, our bodies, our minds subjected to the impersonal needs of capital. How, in other words, can we have the promise of culture to be a universalist can only be to come through the particular for me, because we live in determinate bodies, determinate families, determinate places, determinate worlds. So universalist politics is nothing if it doesn't live through and celebrate and ensure the flourishing of the particular, and we've got a lot to learn from that from Te Ao Māori.
Kia ora koutou, thank you for that. I feel like I've learned so much already from that incredibly rich discussion. We're going to take a quick tea break, get some fresh air, stretch your legs, grab a cup of tea. Let's get back here, say, quarter two? Okay, fine? Quarter two? Alright, quarter two. I realised I haven't actually introduced myself properly. Sorry about that. So, for those of you who are not from Wellington and whose company I haven't had the pleasure of making, my name is Nīkau Neera. Ko tainui te waka, ko whitirea te maunga, ko Raukawa te moana, ko takapau tuahi a raiwa ko honga ka ngā marae, ko Ngāti Toarangatira ko Kāi Tahu ko Ngāti Pāhewere ko Ngā Puia ki Ngā Iwi, ko Te Rauparaha Te Ātiawa. My name is Nīkau Neera. I'm a City Councillor for Wellington City Council. I'm a long-time member of the Wellington Socialist Society, and I was very honoured to be asked to facilitate this panel. So that's who I am, that's why I'm here. That's why I'm dressed like this, that's another story. Okay, so this second part of our Saturday evening keynote is going to be a bit of a Q&A. We'll try and keep it flowing. I want to get through maybe at least kind of 5-10 kind of good substantive questions before we're out of here at 12:30. I will say to our panelists that not all of you have to answer every question. You can if there's a really good one, but if there's maybe one that you feel really passionately about, just jump in, just dominate that ground, just hop in. Before we start with the Q&A, I have some reflections on what we discussed in the first half of this, and I think what we've been talking about with the intersections of the Māori sovereignty movement and the movement for treaty justice and the struggle for socialism is it's sort of this line that I riff on a little bit in my own sort of public speaking, and it reminds me that Tino Rangatiratanga and the treaty itself presents a real ontological challenge to the supremacy of the colonial state. And what I mean by that is, as we saw in recent debates where the Prime Minister was challenged to assert that the Crown was sovereign, but wouldn't say whether Māori ceded sovereignty, which I thought was very interesting. What the treaty does is it lays bare the foundations by which the state claims legitimacy in this country. And one quote that I really like to throw out was Lenin, where he named one of his books, capitalism as the highest form of imperialism. And I think what it reminds me in this country is what we're doing as we do stop works and we fight against cuts and fight against privatisation and fight against deregulation. We're fighting essentially the neoliberal austerity project there, and that's good and that's fine. But I think what the struggle for treaty justice reminds us is that those things, as Lenin says, are a symptom of imperialism. They are a new world phenomenon, in our case, of the constant search for new markets to fill the coffers of the old world, and the constant infinite expansion of that rapacious capitalism across all the whenua of the world. And I think the reaction by the two kinds of class enemies that we're dealing with, that sort of old guard, your Dame Fran Wilds and your Kerry Prendergasts in Wellington, your Sir Bob Joneses, but also the sort of new industrial class of the David Seymours, and those kinds of people. I think the twin reaction to both of them against the treaty, even though they are actually groups with quite different goals, I think it really proves that the treaty challenges both the neoliberal austerity project and the global imperialist project. Those are just some reflections I had on some of the corridor that was shared in the first half. I'm now going to chuck it over to the floor. If you have a question, just stick up a fist and I'll call in. There we go. Send. Maybe just stand up and yell.
Yeah, okay. I have a question that Dougal partially answered, but I'd like to get a little more reflection on it, which is that obviously the relationship between the movement of Māori sovereignty and the movement of socialism in New Zealand has been very fraught. But I would like to know if some of those examples of that relationship really working and doing something substantive can form the basis of how we want to relate in the future. Dougal mentioned some of those examples. One I'll throw out from the other direction is Pat O'Day, who passed away recently, who was the Jimmy O'Day, wrong person. who passed away recently, who was the driver on the bus for the Land March, which I think is a incredible thing for him to have been a part of, for him to do for that movement. So the basis of my question is, can we draw from, but still in a critical manner, the kind of better angels of our nature from the history of those two movements?
Yes. Yes, we can. From the better angel side of the room. No, I think that, you know, what I wanted to draw before, I think that it's really easy to get stuck into this, you know, the kind of identity politics idea of these dialectics are never reconcilable. Like, I think that it's not helpful to go down that path. Like, as I said before, the intention of Te Tiriti was to be able to form a way to be able to work together. You know, if you talk about people, you know, when Captain Cook, do many people know the story when he went to Niue? And the people of Niue, and I'm really badly paraphrasing, but as I've been told, they'd heard of Captain Cook, they didn't want him to arrive, they got the berries of this banana-like substance that was a red colour, they covered their faces with this red berry substance, and they made it look, when he arrived on their shores, like they were the most rabid cannibals ever, in the effort to be able to drive them away. And basically Captain Cook, apparently, this is told by the Niueans, so you've got to take it with a grain of salt, took one look at them and he was like, not worth the struggle, and then left again. And that's apparently one of the reasons why Niue was never colonised. And so that wasn't us, you know. For Māori, we were actually to a degree welcoming of people from different parts of the world for us to be able to trade together, be able to grow together, be able to do things together. The difference is that we just didn't want them to set up their state and fucking oppress us. Like, that's the main thing there. And so I really do think it is possible to find a way forward, and there's many examples of the solidarities, and one of the things that I often think about is the incredible piece of work convened by the late Moana Jackson, Whai Margaret Mutu, and of course Veronica Tawhai. And you can just raise your hand if you've heard of Mātiki Mai and the work around constitutional transformation. It's awesome. That came from Moana basically spending 5 years being told by his people to just talk about it, so I'm glad to see that it's been largely effective. And one of the things that they talked about is, what does a Te Tiriti-based future look like? What can that structure be? What does it look like? And some of it was about the values that we base our country on, so taking examples from other Indigenous constitutions that at the very ground level, at our highest decision-making body, we decide, for example, we don't mess with Papa Tuanuku. Our Earth Mother is, you know, really important and sacred, and we have to look after her. And what are the values that we want to base our country on, not just allowing every 3 years another government to come in and just do random stuff. So the values are important and the structure was important, and they imagined some ideas about how to actually live into Tino Rangatiratanga and having a kawanatanga sphere and having sometimes a joint sphere where we make decisions together. And the reason I bring this up is because what I think is possible is that the kawanatanga sphere within Aotearoa can be a socialist sphere. Like, it can be based, like, it is up to Tauiwi to be able to think about what is the kawanatanga, what is the state if there is one, what is the best possible version of it, what does that look like, and fight for it. And then know that Māori aren't necessarily always going to be on the same page, because on principle we need to make our own decisions. But in some ways, if we were both moving towards the values of socialism and towards the values of Tino Rangatiratanga, then I think we can actually get to a point where we have a somewhat functioning structure that doesn't mean we have to be in this oppressive and unequal relationship for the rest of all of time. So, yes.
Kia ora, thank you for that.
Anybody else? Any more for anyone? At the back there.
Yeah, I have a question for Catherine. As mentioned, you've been part of recent like land struggles and struggles against Sopatu, and I wonder if you have any insights or things from that experience that kind of sheds light on the things that we're discussing tonight.
On. Well, yes, I do, but I'm not sure what you mean by the things that shed light.
Or even just connections between what we're talking about tonight.
I think during the negotiations for the Te Tiriti, we were representing a multi-iwi forum of a group of Taranaki tribes that the government, we said we had to be part of a large natural grouping. Basically, I see the Te Tiriti as, well, the settlement process as the government's attempt to extinguish our rights, because we have to, every group that is negotiating treaty settlements have to sign up to that it meets, it's going to extinguish all their rights under all declarations and UN conventions and so forth, which is a disgusting way to start a good faith negotiation. Also, in our treaty negotiations, one of the things that we said was that the Wellington claim is the Raupati claim. We were driven out early on. It was from the 1840s. We were driven out of Wellington, and we were starved. All our cultivations were taken early, and with the successive blows of the legislative criminalisation of us and the Reserve Lands Act and so forth, we considered, on the basis of all that our claim was the Raupati claim. Well, the government did not accept that, because the Raupatu only existed, according to them, from the time of 1863, the New Zealand Settlements Act. So in other words, the whole process of the treaty settlement negotiations is very oppressive in a way, and we have to fit within the government parameters and definitions of our words, you know. And this is just an example of what it was about. And so we knew, and when I talk about incrementalism, we could either engage in this process and get a settlement of maybe 1% of the value of the land that was taken, or we didn't engage at all, and if we didn't sign, we'd go to the bottom of the heap. So that was it's not an equal negotiating position, and that is true of all treaty settlements, really. The more recent one, the Shelley Bay Maru Kaikuru occupation, went on for, I think, 525 days. It is one of the longest occupations, and it was actually one of the most peaceful occupations that we've had, certainly in this area. It was longer than Bastion Point and longer than, the others. but that was caused really by the government HASHA Act, the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Act. And so there are still things being done that are totally antithetical to Tino Rangatiratanga. And so I think basically our young people, when we signed the settlement, we did it in a public forum, and all of our people started coming up and wanted to sign, not just the negotiators. They wanted to sign it. The young people were told, don't sign. You will be back, and you might have to blame us for that. But that is the way that we have to work, and I hope that has answered your question.
Oh, that's fine. Do we have a question maybe for Brother Dougal? Anybody?
Not specifically, but my question is just, ever since the government came in and the proposed Treaty Settlement Act and what have you, I've heard lots of people talking about the attacks that the government is carrying out or planned on Māori without a lot of detail about what those are. Cassie's actually ran through a few examples that I know about. But I was wondering, does anybody know of an article or a document that sort of lays out what the government's planning and what these things mean and why they're bad and how they should be opposed and stuff, that, you know, someone like me who, I think one of the reasons why people don't say, because the people talking about it mostly are aware of what these things are, but just something I can read and say, oh, okay, this is specifically, you know, this thing is happening or this is what's planned. So maybe there isn't such a thing, but if there is, please share it.
So just write down on your phone, Eva Corlett and The Guardian. There's two pieces, it's a bit confusing because there's two, I think they may have changed the article, but basically what she did is she laid out all of the attacks. But just have a little look around because there's two. Eva Corlett, Corlett, and she delves into all of them. And it's a really good piece, The Guardian.
I kind of felt somebody must have written an article.
Here's one we prepared earlier. Yeah.
Choice, thank you for that. Was there a question in the front here?
Yeah. Maybe I can
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks. My name is Pablo. I come from Chile, and this is my second day. Is it? I don't know. I think I arrived yesterday. And first of all, I want to thank you all because I've learned so much from this session. It's been great. And I have many questions, but I'll try to keep it short. I think that the question of self-determination has always been very complicated, both for indigenous peoples and for communists or socialists. Because we all know what we mean by determination, right? And I think it's what Kassie was saying about power and decision making, which is what is at stake probably in the attacks at Te Tiriti and all of that. The problem is with the other part of the phrase, right? The self. Who are we referring? Who is that us that is supposed to be self-determining or being able to make those decisions? And I just want to bring an experience of our constitutional convention in Chile that we had recently. We had two, but the second was made by the fascists, so it doesn't count. I want to talk about the first one, where we actually had democratic representation, including indigenous peoples. And there was a moment in the debate in the Committee for Political system, for the political system and the territorial arrangement of a new constitution in Chile, that some indigenous groups were calling for to understand autonomy as control of mostly control of the borders of their own land, including being able to control who can come in and out, and the argument for that was that they didn't want Peruvians and Venezuelans and other poor migrants from Latin America to come and change their customs and their culture. And so it was highly problematic for the Chilean leftists in the room to be against that kind of xenophobic comprehension of autonomy, right? And so that brings me to the question is, how expansive do you think a concept we need of that self, that us, that universal, that is able to go beyond those borders that always have to be transient, temporary, and how that relates to the experience of autonomy and self-determination in Maori, iwi, which I think it's very different from the indigenous peoples in Chile, but I think it's an interesting debate. I know that it's not like a short question or answer, but I just wanted to bring that to the table.
Yeah, I guess, in some ways we're lucky because we're an island with a treaty. But I guess I'll pass it over.
Yeah, it's a big question. I think a concrete place to start for us here is the experience of the struggle over public health during the COVID emergency, which was a class struggle. Yeah? And Ngāpuhi in the north instituting borders to prevent the spread of disease into their communities were carrying out an act that was of universal significance and actually protected the vulnerable in all communities. And there was a very strange moment here where that challenged the power of the state, and so you had Simon Bridges, who was the leader of the National Party at the time, trying to get the cops to say this is a terrible thing. The police kind of realising that it actually carried out a public health task that happened to suit them at that moment, to try not to say that on the radio, but also not saying that they approved, and all kinds of people dancing around that issue. Similarly here, and thinking, acknowledging Catherine here in Pornaki, where often our protests have been guided by principles from Te Ātiawa. And I think that's been particularly useful, thinking about your words to the Palestine protest that happened a couple of weeks ago, the idea that we focus on ideas, not people, and what it means to have a local peace laid down over a space. So I think there are kind of abstract answers to this. I think they are negotiated in moments, and the point you made, it's difficult to be in a room that sense that we also just have to be in that room to have those arguments. But equally, I think what we can learn from Te Ao Māori, where there are these traditions of collectivity that continue, that have been smashed up much more thoroughly in the Pākehā world with the decline of the unions, is the appropriation of this language of self-determination. I'm thinking about COVID here again, with the idea self-determination doesn't mean I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. Yeah? Bodily autonomy doesn't mean I can just behave in a completely selfish way. Part of self-determination collectively being exercised to protect the most vulnerable, the weakest, the sickest, those amongst us who need the most help, that actually being a collective way of being together. I think that was played out in this city. We'll all remember that. That was played out in a really, really intense way for it, wasn't it, right? Where self-determination was a term that was used and exploited by the far right to mean I couldn't care less about any of you. I want to do whatever I want, whenever I want to. And we actually had guidance from Te Ātiawa, we had guidance from others saying that's not what we mean on this space. And so that was Neera, I think, where those two coalesced really importantly and guided non-Māori in that universal class struggle for public health.
Can I just add? One possibility is that your Indigenous people were in a vulnerable situation, and for that reason did not want other people coming in. And you know, I can appreciate that if that is the case, and I think it should be respected. It could be vulnerable in terms of their social structure and systems, or their young people's thinking whakaaro, you know, that sort of thing. But I do think that I'm losing it.
It's very loud. It's very loud.
Can I just jump in if you remember? Just grab the mic back. Yeah, I want to talk about this because I think it's a good, juicy question. And having watched some of what's happening in Chile, like, you know, it's complicated, and I don't think we should avoid the complications. And I think what I will add to that is that, yeah, there's a discussion within Te Ao Māori about what Tino Rangatiratanga is, because people do think it's self-determination. You know, we do have our uncles and cousins that will set up shop in the bush somewhere and live their own life, and, you know, not get passports or believe in councils have any say over them, and it's actually a very individualistic idea of what self-determination is, and that is a response. I believe that is often a response from pain and dispossession and disconnection. And so I just want to say that I think we should also be really open to the fact that we're all swimming and marinating in a capitalist world that is often xenophobic and is going on. And I think we need to be able to have a critical lens over what Indigenous ideas are. And I think actually the main battleground where that's going to be is around economic justice. And I don't want to oversimplify it, because I think sometimes that happens within socialist spaces, about this idea of all these iwi corporates and all their money, you know, laughing all the way to the bank. And I don't think that's fully accurate, but I do think that as Māori, we haven't fully fleshed out the discussion about the role of capitalism within Tino Rangatiratanga. And that we're going to see more of that. We're going to see a lot more of that pumping up. And in some ways, that's about all of us, but in some ways that's a kōrero that as Māori we will be needing to have with each other, and they're going to be hard conversations, because the truth is that, you know, capitalism is pretty alluring, and it's alluring for people who have had nothing and believe that's going to be the way out of it. And it's very hard to tell our own people, sacrifice yourselves, don't invest, don't do this, don't do that, because of an ideal where you have people who cannot put food on the table, and they genuinely believe that's going to be the way out of it. So I'll just say that while the xenophobia, absolutely, look, you don't have to look far, you just have to look at Brian Tamaki and what he gets up to know that there are people within our own world who are doing stuff like that from a bad faith place. But very genuinely, the thing that I'm very interested in is how we're going to talk about how does Tino Rangatiratanga align with capitalism or not. So yeah, he whakaaro tēnā.
No, I haven't remembered. But I was saying to my sister in the break, there's a tangi on at the moment, a tangihanga for a high-ranking member of the Manga Mob. And he is also a person who has been involved and supported many of our marae and our youth sports teams. And he is a highly respected gentleman. And his tangi is huge. Now, when the people at his tangi, if you ask them, do you subscribe to socialism? They would say, hell, what? But if you ask them about their values and how they act and what matters to them, it will be socialist, if you want to call it that. I guarantee it. Oh well, there might be some capitalists, the odd one that. But the priority normally for Māori too is their whānau, extended whānau. And I was watching actually a program about the Tangata Pacifica who had been living in South Auckland, and they were talking about their values and their lives and so forth, and they all said what was the only thing that was important to them was their aima, or their whānau, extended whānau, and their community, you know. And so that's really the smallest unit in our society.
Kia ora. I'm actually going to be really selfish and put a question to the panel myself, because I think we're pulling a really interesting thread here, and I think this is a question that is going to be really, really relevant with the next government, and I think just the next 5 to 10 years in this country. So I'll preface it with a little experience of my own. When I was a kid, my dad was a treaty negotiator for our iwi, getting our treaty settlement. And he was negotiating with what was at the time the John Key and Chris Finlayson government, kind of between 2008 and 2012, that kind of time. Now, Chris Finlayson, interesting guy, National Party hardcore, probably the most pure capitalist that this country has ever produced. You know, but also happens to be gay, also happens to really believe in the treaty, but from a property rights perspective. So I think a result of Finlayson thought, if I can call it that, was a really funny kind of harmony of interests between Māori and the capitalist state. The neoliberal John Key government at the time was desperately trying to get rid of state functions, right? Trying to cut housing, cut education, cut healthcare in particular, getting rid of all of these things at the same time as Māori were trying to claw these things back as a way of expressing their Tino Rangatiratanga. And what happened is you had this really funny scenario where iwi such as mine, who were getting their settlements around this era, were seeing these as opportunities, saying, oh, we can deliver housing to our own people, we can deliver healthcare to our own people, at the same time as the capitalist state was shaving them off, iwi were picking them up. And so I guess the question I want to ask the panel is, what happens if we win? What happens if we do stop the neoliberal project in this country? And what happens if we look at returning to a more kind of universal model that we would have seen in the 40s and the 50s in this country? Where does that leave iwi Māori?
Well, what did they say at the radio? I'm very glad you asked me. A few things on this from the Pākehā side of the fence. I think one is that it is wrong of us to expect a uniformity of views in Te Ao Māori. Yeah? We don't expect it of ourselves. We don't think when we talk about the left even, or the labour movement, or what we mean is a set of debates and different strategies and different perspectives. It would be bizarre if that were not also the case in Te Ao Māori. Yeah? And so I think the first thing to say is we shouldn't hold people to a higher standard or an unrealistic sense there. So debate is useful and good, and it's been fascinating from the outside watching reporting of these massive hui that have been happening. And to see the different kind of inflections and different points of emphasis in different parts of the country. Think about some of these ideas around investment. As socialists, I think we also have to point out this is difficult. I mean, the question of charter schools at the moment is the other area that's coming up in housing. Yeah. I think one of the things that we can do as socialists that's important is find ways to raise points that we believe to be true, even if people disagree with us. And I think one of those with charter schools is it's an attempt by the government at a privatisation and a money-making model is broken from the beginning, and so transforming that for just ends is not something that's going to happen. There's that line in the Bible, no man can serve two masters, and I think that applies in politics as well. So that's an aspect where we're not going to convince people immediately, obviously, but if you're going to have a meaningful relationship that's built on joint struggle, you still turn up for the struggle, you still turn up to support, you still turn up so it can be based on relationship, but you also haven't hidden what you think. Yeah? And so I think there are disagreements coming where we'll march together on some issues, and then there'll be points of tension on the other. The third point, though, and I think this is really important for a weekend like this one, and why I'm so grateful to be here and to be in conversation with all of you, is that the enormity of the climate crisis and the enormity of the environmental destruction that's happening, and all of the questions that have come up about some of the international links around Indigenous struggle over land and resources to save them, yeah? And you think there about the trajectory of capitalism, there will not be, I'm convinced, there will not be a scenario where winning means a return to some kind of sustainable social democratic order with capital still functioning. That wasn't winning for Māori in all sorts of ways. The height of the welfare state was also the height of people being stolen from their families, and the height of language trying to be ripped out, the pepper potting approach to, there were never good old days. There were never good old days in that sense. But equally, the enormity of the climate crisis means that I think what has seemed utopian or far-fetched or dreaming for many, many years around post-capitalist futures and around total transformations and so on actually are sober, realistic assessments of a world in which the alternative actually is barbarism on a scale that we're seeing already in the Middle East and in the climate catastrophe and all the environmental destruction that's happening already. So I think holding fast to an image of a future that is unapologetic about what others might have called the utopian strains of our politics and the sense of socialism as a radically different order has never been more urgent than it is at the current periods.
All right, that was a fantastic answer. Do we have any final questions we've got about? Okay, Sid.
I just want to turn towards political matters. What do we need to get done before the Hikoi on November 19th?
Okay, so here's the thing. Right, the Hikoi will be leaving from the north on the 10th, so that's not too far away. There is a rōpū that has been established, which Keith and Vicky are both involved in, and Keith's daughter Shamia has been leading, which is called Te Tiriti Action Pōneke, Te Tiriti Action Group Pōneke, TAG for short. And the purpose of that rōpū is to be able to work in partnership with mana whenua in order to be able to host the motu when they come. Like it's highly likely that this could be the biggest march that we've ever seen in our country. And so that's a lot of strain on our mana whenua who are here. And so this rōpū has been set up in order to be able to help relieve some of the burden upon mana whenua. We know we're talking about portaloos, we're talking about accommodation, like all of the least glamorous stuff than showing up and, I don't know, waving your flag at the Hikoi. So if that is something that you're interested in volunteering on the day, you're welcome to come and talk to me afterwards, and I can put your name down and add you to a volunteer list, and you can get a task in terms of how to be able to help here, because we will need to be able to look after all the people who come here and make sure that the Hikoi is done with the spirit and the intention of Te Ātiawa, which is about, I'm not trying to speak for you, Whaikath, but yeah, Te Kau o Te Raukura, which is about peace. So there's work that I think all of us can do to be able to help with that. So yeah, if you want to get involved, come and talk to me, and I might make a paper out of someone's book and write your names down old school, and someone will get in touch. The other things that can be done is, so Action Station have been trying to think about that realm of reaching people outside our immediate base, the people who would show up here, and so trying to show a critical mass of support for honouring Te Tiriti, both in the Hikoi and beyond. So if that's your jam and you want to really make your support for Te Tiriti known, then we, if you go for togetherfortetiriti.nz, and I'll give you this afterwards, you can buy placards there that say Together for Te Tiriti and put them up, especially in strategic places like places where they will be seen, because what we're trying to do is create a hegemony that says we support Te Tiriti as an Aotearoa. It's not just Māori, it's all of us. We're going to move towards this together. So that's one thing, is you can get a placard, we'll have t-shirts soon, and just you showing your support creates a social norm out in the rest of the world that other people will be like, oh shit, I'm going to get on that thing too. So there's that. And then the third thing to be thinking about, and I know this isn't everyone's cup of tea, is about preparing for submissions. So it's highly unlikely that the coalition will smack down the bill because it's in their Bible, aka coalition agreement. And so after the hikoi is done, we don't want to reach a point where everyone just goes home and nothing else happens, especially because it's about to be Christmas, silly season, they know that we're going to be busy. So our team is working with a range of different organisations to be able to get as many submissions as possible, because we need the headlines come next week on the next year on the Treaty Principles bill to be record amount of people are against this bill and support Te Tiriti or Waitangi. We cannot have the far right claim that, we have to claim it. So I would say start getting ready for what submissions will look like, and also getting your mates submitting as well. So that's, I think, 3 things that you can do. Get a placard or a t-shirt, show up to the hikoi, let me know if you want to volunteer, start preparing for submissions. Is that good, Sam?
Good start.
A good start? I got more later. Yeah, just something to start with.
Who's going to make the hummus?
Is that you?
Choice. Look, I did see some other hands, but I think we better leave it there. It's 8:30 now. Before we close, I'm under very strict instructions to give a shout out to the Commonweal magazine launch, which is going to be happening down at Trades Hall. Put your hand up if you don't know where Trades Hall is. Okay, if you don't know where Trades Hall is, follow everyone else. Look, we're going to close off here. Oh, we have some beautiful gift bags, actually. Thank you for our speakers. Feel free to pass those down. Thank you so much for sharing your mātauranga and all of your discussions this evening. I feel much richer for it personally, and I'm sure many in our audience will feel the same. Please give them a round of applause. Nā reira, tēnā te mihi kia koutou katoa, kua hui mai nei te ahi nei, kua kōriotia, kua whai mātauranga, kua tuku araha kia mātau. Tēnei te mihi, haere atu kei raro i te aroha o te kaunga te raukura, me te mana motuhake o Ngāti Toarangatira. Nā reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora mai tata katoa. I will finish the karakia, actually. Inihia, beautiful nui, kia wātea, kia mama, te ngāka, te tinana, wairua, te ara tangata, koia rā, e runga, e whakahiri atu ki runga, kia wātea, aira, kua wātea. See you at Trades Hall.